But it's my pleasure to represent the North Superior Workforce Planning Board, and we're very pleased to act in the capacity of Northern Policy Institute's Gala Platinum sponsor. Many of you may know the history of our relationship with Northern Policy Institute, but for those of you that do not, and I'll try not to bore you with all of the details, but I would like to add just a few momentous notes to what Charles said earlier in the evening. But our relationship actually started a number of years ago when the North Superior Workforce Planning Board commissioned 2 research projects, and they were both done by Dr. Livio Di Matteo, who is here, and I look forward to seeing you later, Livio. 2 research projects as an innovative extension of the many activities working with stakeholders in the North for the North. Drum roll. In September of 2006, our board commissioned a report on the strategies for developing a broadly based regional knowledge economy in Northwestern Ontario. Catchy title, isn't it? This report identified a number of strategies to pursue opportunities in the knowledge economy. One of the strategies identified that a knowledge economy in Northwestern Ontario should focus on policies that create new knowledge and can be applied to the regional economy. An agency that would act as an inventory of our assets and search out and market local research expertise could be an important catalyst in the economy. A Northwestern Ontario Policy Research Institute serving as an arm's-length source of policy advice to regional leaders, as well as a repository of knowledge and data of the region. This report was followed a year later on research into the need, models, and perhaps structure of a policy institute. This report generated 2 recommendations, which were, number 1, to create a Northwestern Ontario Policy Institute with a mission to analyze the economic, business, technological, scientific, and social issues to generate policy advice that can be applied to the region's economy. The Institute would serve as an arm's-length source of policy advice to regional leaders and act as an advocacy voice and serve as another driver of regional enhancement. The second recommendation was that an implementation committee consisting of key regional partners be struck to bring about the creation of a policy institute. The North Superior Workforce Planning Board was an active partner of the implementation team and worked collaboratively for years towards the creation of Northern Policy Institute. It's our pleasure tonight to join you in celebrating NPI's 5 years of success. It was an honor for NSWPB to play an instrumental role in the reports and the work that resulted in the creation of Northern Policy Institute. It was a privilege to be a partner with NPI in our Local Employment Planning Council pilot project, and they continue to be engaged in the project and a strong support for the project and our board. It continues to be a pleasure to work with Charles and the team, and it never ceases to amaze me how many wonderful ideas come out of discussions with that team and with Charles and with people that are really engaged around the table, because relationships are really what it's all about. And they truly are really good at building relationships, strengthening them, and bringing people to the table. And we pride ourselves at doing that as well at the board. And so we can really relate to Charles and the team and the board of Northern Policy Institute. So it is a pleasure to work with them, and we hope to continue in ensuring that its future stays strong and rooted in its arm's length capacity as policy advisor and a strong advocacy voice to drive regional enhancement. Congratulations to the Northern Policy Institute Board of Directors, Charles as President and CEO, and all its staff on this tremendous accomplishment, and we wish you continued success and leadership in sustaining and building the economy of Northern Ontario. Thank you. And in a perfect world, I would sit down now, but you don't get rid of me that easily. As the presenting sponsor, it's also my extreme pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this evening. And I am so not French. I have to apologize for that. So any errors I make in pronunciation are totally on my own, because I have been sitting next to Matthew, and he very graciously told me how to pronounce these, so if I goof up, it's all on me. But it is my pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, and that speaker is Dr. Matthew Coon. He is former chief of his home community of Mistassini, Quebec, and is known as one of the most significant leaders of the Cree communities. Born in 1957 in northern Quebec, Matthew attended La Tuque Indian Residential School in La Tuque, Quebec. He grew up to study political science at Trent University and law at McGill. Matthew began his political career at the young age of 16. Now, how many people can say that? When he attended a meeting with his community elders to discuss Phase 1 of the James Bay project. He was first elected as Grand Chief of the Grand Council of the Crees and Chairman of the Cree Regional Authority in 1987, where he served 4 terms in office. And as a past political person, you don't often stay in 4 terms. In 1994, Matthew was awarded the Goldman Environment Prize for his efforts. In 1995, he received a National Aboriginal Achievement Award. He has also received 2 honorary degrees, including a Doctor of Laws from Trent University and a Doctor of Laws from the University of Toronto. Dr. Coon was instrumental in achieving an agreement on governance with Quebec, which after 7 years of negotiations gave the Cree more power and influence in the James Bay region. Through this agreement, the municipality of James Bay was replaced by the EU ITSI, James Bay Territory, a regional authority which would be governed by Cree and non-natives alike. He joins us tonight to tell us about this historic accomplishment. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Dr. Matthew Coon.
Man, that light is bright. Miigwech, the Naskun cheese goes Samuel, the book Simon Danji Danji, which you get, Danji, wish bait to me get. Dan House guys say, it's Scotland or Jano, he knows a Kagjo Emstagushu's guy. That's when suggestion is we Samga. Man, that felt good. I always wanted to say that about Charles. Terrible, that's right. No, I'm actually deeply honored to be invited here. I love telling stories. At a certain age, if you're 60 plus, I think you're privileged and entitled to tell some stories. So before I begin, I've shared this couple of stories with the board of directors and some people that were invited, like Chief Jolly and his wife and his son. Now, a lot of people have asked me how I got involved in politics. I like to tell the story. As a young man, I wasn't young, I was actually as a kid, 6, 7, 8 years old. My father would share this story with me, and he would say, they will come. They will come and they will take our trees. They will come and they will take our ore. Then they will come and they will make our rivers to flow backwards. As a kid, I didn't know what he's talking about. Who's they? I wanted to go and play cowboys and Indians. And I was actually the cowboy. The other story that I'd like to share was, my dad would tell me the story. Until the age of 16, I grew up in a tent frame. A very isolated community, didn't have access road till 1978. And this is a story that my dad would share with me and my uncles and my aunts. Again, at a young age, up till I was a teenager. And they would tell me the story of my grandmother. My grandmother went down a lake to get a pail of water. She took her dipper. And as she did, she looked up in the mountain. In the mountain, she saw an open vision. She saw something that was eating the trees. And as she looked at the river, was strange because the river was made to flow backwards. And so you heard a voice that said, the very water that you drink, someday you will have to pay for it. Fast forward, in the 1990s, in our opposition to the Great Whale River project, I asked my dad, take me to the spot that you told me about Grandma. And sure enough, we went way into the bush. And I stood where my grandmother stood. And I looked at the mountain. It was all clear cut from heavily forestry operations. I looked at the river. The river was made to flow backwards. Why? Because they put weirs, stopped the water, and it went backwards. And every summer, every spring, we were told you have to boil your water. Or you go to the store and you pay to drink the water. So growing up in that kind of environment, I guess my dad, like every young kid, I wanted to quit school. And he would remind me of the first story I told you. But he also said, son, you go to school. And excuse the word, I'm just translating what he's saying. And he said, you go to school, and you'll learn the white man's ways. And you'll learn them well. And come back, for they will come. So I guess I was politicized, and I finally found out who they were. So I'll start with that story. I want to again thank you for the invitation to share with you the Cree experience on sustainable partnerships, northern development and governance in relation to Quebec's Plan Nord and our traditional homeland we call Inuit. When I say Inuit, I'm not swearing even though I'm from Quebec. Right, Mr. Harley? Mr. Harley? The past 50 years have seen a radical change in the role of the Cree of Inuit with regard to development. 50 years ago, development in our homeland was initiated and carried out by outsiders, with virtually no consultations or involvement of the Cree. Today, that would be unthinkable. How did we get from there to here? I believe it's a remarkable story and one that is worth sharing with you. So let me cut to the chase. Some of the main ingredients for a successful partnership include commitment from all partners, the right balance between competing interests, and respect for treaty rights and one another. If our experience is any guide, engagement is the key. It is difficult to build a relationship if you don't talk. If it is government and First Nations are willing to engage with one another in a spirit of mutual openness and respect without preconceived ideas, then great things are possible. In telling our story, I will touch on some major milestones in recent Cree history, including the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement signed in 1995, and the Pays de Brave signed in 2002, and the Cree Vision of Plan Nord, and the Agreement on Governance signed with the Government of Quebec on July 24, 2012. So to begin, a word about the Cree and our homeland of Inuit. I believe most of you are familiar with the Cree of Inuit. For those who aren't, we call ourselves EU and Inu. Our name means simply the people. There are more than 20,000 of us, and about 18,000 reside in 9 Cree communities. Soon we'll have Mo Quebec as the 10th, and West South Seabee as the 11th Cree community. For thousands of years, we have lived in Inuit. Inuit is a traditional territory and homeland of the Cree of Northern Quebec. It covers some 400,000 square kilometers of land, or 2/3 the size of France. Inuit is not empty or unoccupied territory. This territory is in fact the basis of Cree traditional economy and self-sufficiency. Inuit is fully occupied and intensively used and managed by the Cree. both for traditional activities of hunting, fishing, and trapping, and increasingly in other forms of economic activity. I am a son of a hunter, and I'm proud of that. I guess a little history is in order. In 1970, the government of Quebec announced a massive James Bay hydroelectric project. This enormous project would radically affect Inuit and the traditional way of life of the Cree. Yet at that time, Quebec did not consult us or seek our consent for this development. We were forced to take legal proceedings to defend our rights, our environment, and our way of life. Thus began a marathon court case that led in November 1973 to a decision by the Superior Court of Quebec granting us a temporary injunction to halt the James Bay project. The injunction was suspended a week later and eventually reversed. Nevertheless, it brought Quebec and Canada to the negotiating table. Over the next 2 years, intensive negotiations took place between the Cree, the Inuit of Nunavik, Quebec, and Canada. These negotiations resulted in the signature of November 11, 1975, of the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement. This agreement is a complex document. It contains some 30 chapters that address such varied subjects as Cree and land regime, local and regional government, health and education, justice and police, environmental protection, hunting, fishing, trapping regime, community and economic development, an innovative income security program to support the Cree traditional activities, and more besides. The agreement is the first modern Aboriginal land claims treaty in Canada, and in 1982, it received a constitutional protection under Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982. Hope I don't screw up the video here. Sometimes I disappear, I reappear again. And I think I need a comb to, no, just kidding. For some time after its signature, the promise of partnership of the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement was not fulfilled. The 1980s and 1990s were a difficult time in many ways. Many disputes arose between the Cree and the governments because the Cree considered that the governments were not living up to the promises they made in the treaty. Legal proceedings followed one another until it became difficult to keep track. In the early 2000s, relations between the Cree and Quebec were at an impasse. Something had to change. In 2002, the Cree and Quebec agreed to set aside the old conflicts and to reset the relationship. And so in 2002, we signed the historic Pays de Brave with Quebec. This nation-to-nation agreement enabled us to reestablish and rebuild our relationship with the government of Quebec. The Pays de Brave marked a turning point in relations between the Cree and Quebec. From one of confrontation and conflict, the relationship matured into a cooperation and partnership. In general terms, the Pays de Brave established a new nation-to-nation relationship between the Cree and Quebec, based on a mutual respect, increased autonomy for the Cree, and a new partnership with the Cree and Quebec in resource development. The Pays de Brave, or Peace of the Brave, provided the mechanism for Quebec to meet a number of its unfulfilled obligations under the original James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. In practice, this means we assume Quebec's obligations. This agreement focused on economic development. It recognized and affirmed that development taking place on our traditional lands requires our explicit consent and our involvement. This requirement for Cree consent has now become bedrock for all economic development projects within Inuit. Prior to the signature of our agreements and benefits of resource development, jobs, contracting, housing, and economic development went largely to the non-Aboriginal communities. By contrast, the Crees were shut out from the benefits of resource development, while it was the Cree who bore its negative impacts: environmental degradation, dislocation of our communities, disruption of our traditional activities. But that is changing now through the tools that, like the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, the Pays de Brave, and our new Cree-Quebec Governance Agreement that provided us some flexibility and some assurance that we would be involved. Over the past several years, development in northern Quebec has been largely framed by the Plan Nord, first announced by former Premier Jean Charest in 2008. Over the background on the Plan Nord. Shortly after my election in 2009, I invited then Premier Nathalie Normando to visit the Cree community of Mississauga and to present the Plan Nord to the Cree chiefs and our Cree leaders. Madame Normando accepted my invitation and presented the outline of the Plan Nord to about 200 Cree leaders. The Cree, then we decided to participate in the partners' tables that led to the development of the Plan Nord. The Cree, we participated fully throughout the whole process leading to the Plan Nord. I myself took part in every meeting of the partners' table and an Aboriginal partners' table. We established a Cree working group on the Plan Nord. A Cree member of this working group participated in each of the sector tables that were established in Plan Nord: access to territory and transport, community development, health and housing, education, culture and identity, wildlife, biofood, tourism, energy, mining, and forestry. We developed position papers on each of these sectors and identified our priorities and expectations with respect to Plan Nord. These efforts resulted with the release in February 2011 of our Cree vision of Plan Nord, which I invite you to consult at our Cree Nation government website. In my introductory comments to the Cree vision of Plan Nord, I stated that the Cree welcome the responsible, sustainable development of their traditional lands. The Cree want to be real partners in the development of territory's vast potential. Certain of the principles were set out in the Cree vision of Plan Nord regarding northern development that should be recalled here. A, we said Quebec must respect the Cree rights and honor its obligations to the Cree, and particularly those provided for in the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement and in Pays de Brave and in the new Cree-Quebec Governance Agreement. B, we said Quebec must respect and maintain that nation-to-nation relationship with the Cree established, again under James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement and the Pays de Brave. C, we said all development projects situated in Inuit will affect Cree rights and interests. They will therefore require consultation and accommodation of the Cree. D, we said Quebec must respect the structures and regimes under the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, including those provided for the environmental and social protection regime of Section 22 of the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. E, we said proponents must demonstrate that their projects are environmentally and socially acceptable, as well as sustainable in terms of the land, the resources, the culture, and identity of the Crees of Inuit. F, we said northern development must provide for meaningful participation and benefits through direct investments, partnerships, contracting, and employment. G, we said northern development must facilitate new partnerships between the Cree and Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal entities. H, we said northern development must provide wealth creation for the Cree and other residents of Inuit through, again, direct investments, contracts, and employment. And I, we said northern development must accept job creation for the Cree through the development of a Cree technical, professional, and managerial workforce and provide a fair share of well-paid jobs for the Cree. Excuse me, they're taking a picture. Okay. I just want to make sure you get a good picture. Now you scared her off. Yeah, exactly. It worked. I would have borrowed a comb from Charles here, but he doesn't have any hair, so. The Cree vision of Plan Nord is not just a statement of principles. It sets forth specific expectations of the Cree regarding all sectors of development. Let me mention a few. He who holds the pen has a lot of power. The government does not have all the solutions. So we took the initiative and said, this is what we want. When you put something on a table, the government is forced to react. So these were some of the issues that we mentioned in the Cree vision of Plan Nord. Housing, transportation, infrastructure. If you want to promote economic development, you got to have highways, you got to have infrastructure, bandwidth, fiber optic lines, etc. And that too was imperative. And of course, we said that Plan Nord has to deal with the proper social and physical infrastructure for all the residents of the North, including the Cree. We talked about a shortage of housing and how we need to invest, and we agreed that Quebec should develop a joint Cree-Quebec housing action plan, setting tables. In energy, we said Inuit has very significant untapped hydroelectric and wind energy potential. The Cree must participate fully in any development of this potential. We have therefore proposed that a special process be in place that would permit the Cree to participate as partners in the development of renewable energy projects over the next 10 years. So we requested a special Cree-Quebec process to develop this plan. Although I'm not free to comment on the details, I can say that the file is now advancing. In mining holds a clear promise for economic development in the Inuit. Large areas of our territory are subject to mining claims. The pace of mining exploration and development is increasing. The challenge is to reconcile mining development with effective Cree participation and with the principles of sustainable development, environmental and social protection. Accordingly, we developed our own Cree Nation mining policy. Under this policy, the Cree undertook to support and participate in resource development within our traditional territories, providing A, our rights are respected, B, appropriate measures are taken to protect the environment and our traditional activities, 3, that benefits flow to our communities. Our position is that no resource development, including mining, may occur in Inuit unless they are socially acceptable to the Cree communities, as demonstrated by the conclusion of agreements with our communities. I may add here, one of the reasons that it's difficult for First Nations to meet with the federal government, there's a myth that has been perpetuated, a myth that all First Nations are anti-development. We were not anti-development. We just want to have a say in the way development took place. We wanted to ensure that any extraction of natural resources that we could benefit from the sale of those like ore, diamonds, or etc. So we weren't anti-development. We have stated that we have started to implement our Cree Nation mining policy. In Quebec alone, I think I negotiated about 9 benefit and impact agreements. Those are what you call collaboration agreements. Example, with Goldcorp, we signed an agreement for Eleanor Gold Project. We have in Quebec the first diamond mine by Stoneway. They call it Winard Diamond Project. That's what you see here. No, just kidding. Tourism. The Plan Nord refers to the rich tourism potential of the North. It states the objective of making the North a world-class tourism destination. The Cree have been working for many years to develop the tourism potential of Inuit. The Cree required support and funding from Quebec for the planning and implementation of tourism infrastructure. Some progress has been made in this file, however, much remains to be done. On environmental protection, with regard to environmental protection of the Northern Territory, the government of Quebec has made the following commitments. A, devote 50% of the Northern Development Territory to environmental protection, safeguarding biodiversity and natural heritage development. And B, to define new policy directions pertaining to conservation and the enhancement of biodiversity throughout Quebec, especially in Northern Territory. The Cree Nation takes the position as stated in our Cree Vision of Plan Nord that the footprint of past industrial development in Inuit must be taken into account in identifying the 50% of the area for environmental protection. The Cree Nation is now working on developing regional protected areas and conservation strategy. A key outcome of this strategy will be to develop a regional network of protected areas and conservation zones of cultural and ecological interest in order to sustain the Cree way of life in Inuit. In order to achieve the strategy, we established a Regional Protected Areas Committee with representatives from all the Cree communities and other interested Cree entities. As a result of this, the Crees with Quebec, we collaborated with Quebec in the establishment of the Seneca National Park Reserve in 2011, the same where we are major participants in its management. We are also working with Quebec regarding the establishment and management of Albanel-Témiscamingue Otis National Park. Throughout the Plan Nord process, the Cree consistently emphasized the link between the Plan Nord and the need for a reform of governance in Inuit in order to end the exclusion of the Cree from the governance of the territory. We argued take a deep breath, Matthew. Take your time. You're doing okay. That's good. We argued without a fair and an inclusive system of governance, there could be no lasting economic development in Inuit James Bay. The exclusion of the Cree from the governance of Inuit resulted in large part from the adoption by Quebec in 2001 of Bill 40. This legislation, which had the effect of transferring critical powers over land use planning and resource management of the whole Inuit to non-native municipalities in the southern part of our region. This legislation excluded the Crees, despite the fact that we formed the majority of the territory's population and occupying the territory in its entirety. Essentially what that means is that the government created Municipality de la Baie James of all the towns that south of us, Chibougamau, Chapet, Quévillon, Matagami, and some localities. If the government wanted an opinion as to the development of the territory, this would be the organization that would be consulted. Therefore, we excluded. Created legislation of creating the Municipality de la Baie James. With that, that was one of our preconditions. I want to change the structure of government where we are involved in decision making, and that was our precondition. So the former Premier Jean Charest and I put in place a special nation-to-nation negotiation process to resolve that dispute and address governance matters in the territory. The special process led to the signature of May 27, 2011 by the Cree, Inuit and Quebec of the Framework Agreement on Governance in the Inuit James Bay Territory. It was on this basis of Quebec's commitment to reform the governance of Inuit that I expressed Cree support for the Plan Nord and joined Premier Charest in signing the Partners' Declaration at the launch of Plan Nord on May 9, 2011. So a new relationship between the Cree and Quebec began on July 24, 2012. This new governance agreement builds upon these two earlier agreements, the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement and the Pays de Brave, to establish a partnership between the Cree, Quebec, and our neighbors, which you call the Jamesians, for the governance of the territory. I saw this as an opportunity. There was a small window of changing the democratic deficit of governing the territory where the original peoples of the land were the majority residents and occupants and occupying the territory. So we seized that opportunity. But I must not let this occasion pass without saluting special contribution made by former Premier Charest and by his Chief of Staff, Dan Gagné. Without their hands-on leadership, their determination, their willingness to think outside the box, the governance agreement would never have happened. The governance agreement sets out the details of a new governance regime at Inuit. It translates the principles of inclusiveness and partnerships in governance into practical mechanisms. For the first time, it gives the Cree the sense that we will be real partners in the governance and the development of our homeland. As you all know, in Canada allocated to the original peoples of this country lands that were already surveyed. They call it reserves. They already sent in third parties, forestry companies, mining companies. The land had no economic value. Gave that land to Indians. When I was chief, I was told that you're responsible under the Indian Act for 3 by 3 square kilometers of land. Yeah, tell that to a son of a hunter who knows that his hunting ground is 30 by 30 square kilometers of land. And I was determined that I would change the structure, that we would be masters of our own destiny. And I saw that window of opportunity. So within that agreement, the Cree Nation government has assumed responsibilities for the land use planning process and resource management functions previously exercised by the province of Quebec over a territory of approximately 70,000 square kilometers of land. That is the area where we created a Cree Nation government, of which I was the chairman of, and responsible, and I'll explain some of the jurisdictions and functions and powers that we have. At the same time, in the governance agreement, a new regional government was created, which exercises land use planning powers over a territory of approximately 300,000 square kilometers. This new regional government is comprised of representatives of the Cree communities, as well as the non-native municipalities in the region. With this governance agreement, we will be taking control, the mechanisms by which control over the territory is exercised. The governance agreement provides that the Cree Nation government shall have the right to exercise jurisdictions, functions, and powers over Category 2 lands under Quebec laws with respect to A, land and resource planning, B, land and resource management, C, regional development, D, municipal management, and E, any other matter that may be agreed with Quebec from time to time. With regard to land use planning on Category 2 lands, the Cree Nation government will have the power to develop A, the strategic vision for economic, social, cultural, and environmental development, and B, the land use development plan to guide urban planning, development, and zoning. With regard to land and natural resource planning, the Cree Nation government will establish an EU Planning Commission. This commission, in consultation with the Cree communities, will prepare a regional land and resource use plan for Category 2 lands. This plan will identify issues, orientations, priorities for land and resource use on Category 2 lands. Further, the Cree Nation government will work with the government of Quebec in developing Quebec's public land use plan for Category 2 lands. With regard to land and resource management, the governance agreement provides that the Cree Nation government may exercise land and forestry management powers on Category 2 lands, subject to negotiation of specific nation-to-nation agreements with Quebec. The management powers will be those defined in current and future Quebec programs as agreed between Crees and Quebec from time to time. The governance agreement provides for a new Cree-Quebec collaborative forestry management regime on Category 2 lands in the territory of the adapted forestry regime. This new management regime will develop integrated forestry management plans with the objectives of A, taking account of Cree interests and concerns, B, determining local objectives for sustainable forestry development, and C, defining measures for the harmonization of uses. With regard to other resources such as minerals, energy, and water, the governance agreement provides that if Quebec entrusts their management to an entity elsewhere in Quebec, it will have to negotiate similar management arrangements with the Cree on terms at least as favorable. Some may ask, thank you for asking. Some may ask if the new governance agreement affects third parties, especially resource companies working in the territory. The answer is that the existing third-party interest on Category 2 lands, such as permits, leases, mining claims, timber and supply and forest management agreements, shall be maintained in accordance with the applicable laws and the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. The governance agreement contains much more, but I hope that this will give an idea of some of its key features regarding the jurisdictions, functions, and powers being assumed by the Cree Nation government and the regional government. The governance agreement signals a new era in governance in the Inuit James Bay territory, an end to the politics of exclusion and the beginning of politics of inclusion, a renewed partnership between the Cree and a new partnership with our neighbors in the governance of the territory, a partnership that is based on mutual respect, fairness, and openness. The governance agreement provides a new model of governance in Inuit. It is first in Quebec and in Canada and perhaps in the world. As former Premier Charis said at the signing of the governance agreement, and I quote, "We've searched and looked for presidents and have found none. It is a first. There are no presidents. I am convinced that leaders of First Nations in Quebec and in Canada will want to look very closely at this agreement today. We would be flattered if they thought that through this agreement and the work we have accomplished together, that there is some sort of inspiration of what they may choose as a common path." End of quote. So in January 2014, the new Inuit James Bay Regional Government and the Cree Nation Government came into being with the adoption of Bill 42 by the National Assembly of Quebec. The difference of the Crees is that we used a legislative approach to protect our rights and our interests. Because if man made laws, man can change them. And certainly if those laws were broken, it's a contract, I can sue you and you can sue me, and we'll have fun. The test of a governance agreement will be in its implementation. For Canada, there now exists an unparalleled opportunity to redress the historic exclusion of Aboriginal peoples. The opportunity is there for everyone to get right this important mix between rights, governance, and development. So there you have it, a thumbnail sketch of where the Cree were 50 years ago and where we are today. We are not so bold as to suggest that our experience applies everywhere. Each First Nation is distinct, and each faces its own unique challenges and opportunities. We respect this distinctiveness. We recognize as well that we have been blessed by a particular set of circumstances that allow us to travel down this road. One thing we do know, however, is that engagement is the key. Without dialogue with government, we would not be where we are today. I am not suggesting that it has always been easy, far from it. People who know the Cree know that we are not naive. The James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement of 1975 resulted from an epic legal battle that we fought against all odds. The Pays de Brave marked a turning point, yes, but that is because it followed 2 decades of intensive legal proceedings. Without the pressure of legal proceedings and public campaigns, these agreements might never have happened. Nor have we grown complacent. We do not take anything for granted. we know that we must remain vigilant to protect our rights. Controversies and disputes remain and will continue, and that is just a fact of life. We will always ensure that our rights are respected and that is given. At the same time, the winds of change are blowing, not only in Inuit, but across Canada. That is probably why you did me the honor of inviting me here today. There is a growing recognition that Aboriginal peoples are not going away, that we will all have more to gain by cooperation than by confrontation. It is in this changed context that I suggest that engagement is the key. Government should not be hesitant about engaging with First Nations, for they have shown that they can deliver the goods as responsible negotiating partners, and just as important, responsible partners in governance. Knowing our respective views, should First Nations be hesitant in engaging with governments, provided, of course, that the dialogue is conducted on a nation-to-nation basis and in the spirit of mutual respect and openness. These were essential ingredients in the negotiation and conclusion of Pays de Brave and the Cree-Quebec Governance Agreement. In the past, criticism was sometimes expressed regarding our engagement with the government of Quebec. But experience has shown that this engagement was absolutely vital. In our respectful view, First Nations should not be afraid to engage directly with provincial governments. Our own Pays de Brave and Governance Agreement resulted directly from dialogue with the government of Quebec. Canada was not involved. We have separate negotiating tables and processes with Canada. But we recognize that Quebec can be a valuable partner, and we have taken pains to build relations with Quebec. Some First Nations take the position that their relations must be exclusively with the federal crown. We respectively disagree. Some matters like natural resources, municipal government, health and social services, education, child services are usually matters of provincial jurisdiction in Canada. It makes sense, in our view, to discuss these matters with a province like Quebec. Experience has shown that such dialogue has been to our advantage. In recent years, we have concluded major agreements with Quebec in each of these fields. Without direct engagement with Quebec, this would not have happened. So what is the alternative? We do not see one. We are not prepared to remain isolated in our communities and wait for the federal government to provide for our needs. That will not happen. It is up to us to reach out and build partnerships with whoever is willing to deal with us in the spirit of mutual respect and to get on with the hard work of nation building, creating jobs and economic opportunities for our people. For the past 50 years, the Cree have experienced among the most rapid cultural change the world has ever seen. From our traditional life on the land, we have been drawn into a participation in the modern industrial economy, and all in the blink of an eye. The challenge for us is now how to maintain a balance between the two. We have no intention of turning back on our language, on our traditional culture. If we did that, we would no longer be Cree. At the same time, our population is growing, and our young people need jobs. To meet their needs, we must be full players in the development of our homeland. Responsible and sustainable development is the key. It is the recognition by development proponents that their projects must be environmentally and socially acceptable to the Cree that has made possible the evolution from a confrontation to partnerships in Inuit over the past 20 years. If this is true for the Cree of Inuit, it holds equally true for Aboriginal peoples everywhere in Canada. The various agreements and initiatives which we have established over the course of 50 years have put us on the path that leads away from historic colonial and paternalistic attitudes and practices and towards self-reliance and progressive nation building. Now that we have largely secured the proper implementation of our treaty, now that we are taking over our proper place in the democratic governance of our territory, and now that our right to full participation in the development of our traditional territory has been properly recognized, now that the concept of Cree consent and the importance of social acceptability of projects has become mainstream for development in our territory, we are ready to become full, active participants in the rational and orderly and sustainable development of the resources on our ancestral lands. We now have the tools to inject our own values, our own principles, and our own traditional philosophies into the way in which development is carried out. We are now ready to become active players in the economy. And with that, as I look behind, I am filled with gratitude. As I look forward, I am filled with vision. As I look upwards, I am filled with strength. And I look within, I discover peace. And with that, thank you very much.
Bonsoir, Wachier, good evening. My name is Pierre Bélanger. I'm the chair of NPI's Development Committee. And on behalf of the Northern Policy Institute and all of you in attendance here this evening, I would like to present a small token of our appreciation to Dr. Coon for his informative and, dare I say, I underlined it and I thought I knew this is what it would be, a challenging talk.